interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zack to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Neat.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So, today's episode we're reviewing for you is actually the Season 2 finale, and also one of the show's admittedly few two-parters. It's like one of two, I think. But this episode is the Season 2 finale, and is a massive two-part episode that it is very interesting. So, this episode, the Tower of Dr. Zalost, is actually very interesting in that that's like one of the more dangerous antagonists that Courage has had to face, which hence why it's a two-parter. In any case, it opens up with the titular Dr. Zalost, along with his henchman Rat, who may or may not be the same Rat from Demon in the Mattress. Either way, I'm going to picture him again, or picture him for the first time. But in any case, it opens with Dr. Zalost and Rat opening fire on the town of Nowhere from his tower, with cannonballs. And these cannonballs are revealed to be special because, as we find out via flashbacks throughout this entire sequence, these are special cannonballs that, when fired and when they come in contact with a person, cause them to become depressed. It causes, basically, long story short, Dr. Zalost found a way to weaponize depression and give it to other people. So yeah, and he initially wants $33.33 trillion to actually fund his research from the mayor and his assistant, who is Floyd. And again, this episode also reinforces the idea that the mayor may or may not exist because he has a completely different design than he did in Cowboy Courage. But in any case, the mayor outright refuses Dr. Zalost's proposal, pointing out that people are already that A, he feels like Dr. Zalost is a bit of a quack, and B, when Dr. Zalost threatens to make the people of Nowhere unhappy, the mayor responds that they're already unhappy because they raised the taxes, and then he kicks Dr. Zalost out, pointing out that if he ever shows up again, he'll have him arrested. So Dr. Zalost decides, and which is what prompts Dr. Zalost to start opening fire on the town. His proposal was rejected, and so he took his vengeance out on everybody. But in any case, within like a matter of minutes, he has completely incapacitated the entire town of Nowhere. Everybody is depressed and miserable, and nobody has any motivation. So this is why he's one of the more effective antagonists, and why he makes sense as a two-parter villain. Because in the span of a half an hour, in the span of like 5 minutes, he is completely and utterly incapacitated the entire town of Nowhere. Which is rather effective, and eventually the mayor and Floyd, upon seeing all of the carnage that Dr. Zalost actually set off and actually instigated in the town of Nowhere, decide to finally actually pay him his money. Meanwhile, Muriel and Courage are actually preparing a special recipe for happy plums, which she claims can make anybody happy, which winds up being a relevant plot point, because Dr. Zalost, the reason he's doing this is because he's a miserable person and doesn't think he can ever be happy. But in any case, Muriel then has Courage prepare the happy plums and also put some sour cream on all of them, or whipped cream or whatever. But in any case, Courage is trying and failing because he can't quite get the proportions right. Meanwhile, Eustace is kind of complaining about the fact that he hasn't gotten his newspaper yet, pointing out that it's usually there by morning, but obviously he doesn't know what's happening in town yet, so he doesn't know what's going on. But in any case, as he's complaining about his newspaper, Muriel tells him not to worry about it, pointing out that it should eventually arrive, and in the meantime volunteers to give him some happy plums, which he does point out he doesn't really have time for, and then proceeds to get into his truck to actually go get the newspaper himself. So at which point Muriel walks into the kitchen, sees that Courage has actually wound up eating the happy plums by accident in an effort to actually try and get the proportions right, and decides that that's fine since they have more than enough. But in case, back at his tower, Dr. Zalost now has all of the money he was requested from the nowhere government, and Rat is currently counting it in the other room. And Dr. Zalost points out that even though he has the money that he was promised, he doesn't feel like he points out it didn't make him happy. So he kind of decides to actually go back on his word and not actually cure anybody, since if he's miserable, then nobody else deserves to be happy either. At which point he then calls Rat to his side, pointing out that he needs a hug, and that his hugs always make Dr. Zalost feel a little bit better. But Rat is clearly annoyed with Dr. Zalost, and for good reason, because when Rat actually goes to hug Dr. Zalost then proceeds to scold him for not giving a proper hug and tells him to get out of his sight. At which point they get a video call from the mayor on their massive TV. Which is effectively, he has a plasma screen TV in an era where they didn't exist yet, which is kind of interesting. But in any case, the mayor then calls up Dr. Zalost and points out that they had a deal, and that Dr. Zalost needs to actually return everybody back to normal as was promised. But Dr. Zalost then just reiterates his previous point, which is that the money didn't make him happy, so he may or may not turn everybody back to normal, which infuriates the mayor. But then Dr. Zalost hangs up, pointing out that he feels like humans are so selfish, and that he shouldn't have to bow to their whims just because they said so. Meanwhile, Eustace has currently arrived at the newspapers, but he's on his way back to the Bagge farmstead, because as he finds out, and as has been implied, he didn't realize that the newspapers were actually not being made, because Dr. Zalost actually fired everything at everybody, and actually just made everybody depressed. But in any case, as he's driving back home, he actually sees Dr. Zalost has parked his tower on the road, and it is a massive tower. Like one of the tank treads is like big enough to cover the entire road by itself, and it is double that size in width. But in case Eustace honks at Dr. Zalost and tries to get him to move, but which catches Dr. Zalost's attention, since he didn't believe there was any happy people left. But in any case, Eustace eventually gets tired of waiting for Dr. Zalost to move his tower, so he goes around him. And at which point Dr. Zalost scolds Rat and wonders if he got everybody. And at which point Rat just kind of shrugs at him. But Dr. Zalost then pulls out a spyglass, and upon realizing that Eustace is actually going back to his house, realizes that if there's one happy person, there's likely more. And so they decide to make a beeline for the Bagge farmstead, so that they can actually fix that little situation. But in case, Eustace then proceeds to barge into the house, pointing out his discomfort at the fact that there are no newspapers being printed, because he doesn't realize that everybody's depressed and doesn't have the motivation to actually go and make the newspapers. So he then proceeds to vent to Muriel about it. And Muriel decides to once again offer him some happy plums, pointing out that it would actually make him feel a bit better. But in any case, as she's kind of trying to console her husband about the fact that he doesn't have a newspaper and can't get another newspaper because nobody's making them, the Dr. Zalost then proceeds to show up at the Bagge farmstead, and when Muriel and Eustace actually come out to investigate, Dr. Zalost opens fire on both of them. He winds up hitting Eustace first, but it doesn't affect Eustace at all, because he's already sad and miserable. He's already a miserable person, so the cannonballs have no effect on him. At which point Dr. Zalost realizes it's a waste of time to actually try and open fire to actually fire his cannonballs at Eustace, so he decides to actually hit Muriel instead. And Courage is currently upstairs chewing on his shoe. He doesn't realize he looks out the window, sees Dr. Zalost's tower, and realizing Muriel and Eustace are in trouble, and then upon hearing Muriel actually cry out for help, he then proceeds to run downstairs and actually try to push Muriel out of the way, but he's too late, and she actually winds up getting hit and winds up becoming depressed as a result of that. At which point Dr. Zalost actually sees Courage and tries to shoot him, but Courage successfully dodges all of his attacks, and then with Eustace's help, they actually try and bring Muriel back into the house. But in the process, Eustace actually winds up getting hit by one of the cannonballs again, and he actually winds up getting annoyed with Dr. Zalost and decides to go get his mallet to go deal with him. At which point Courage then proceeds to scoop up Muriel and then proceeds to bring her into the kitchen to hide. And he actually stuffs her in one of the drawers, which isn't very comfortable, but cartoon physics. And then he himself hides in one of the pipes, which again, not very comfortable, but cartoon physics. While they wait for Dr. Zalost to finish firing off his volley of rounds at the house. And then once it's safe, they all come out. And with Dr. Zalost seemingly placated, at least for now, Eustace decides to actually suggest that that now would be a perfect time to actually crack into those happy plums, since he's assessed that Muriel actually kind of needs them and might actually need them to actually gain her motivation again. So Courage then tries to cheer Muriel up, but she's too depressed to actually notice. At which point Eustace walks in with 2 mugs full of happy plums and hands one to Courage, telling him to feed her since she's always liked him best. At which point Courage tries to do the whole airplane shtick with his spoon in his mug, but Muriel is too depressed to even eat, so he decides to drop it and just puts the happy plums in his pocket. Well, if he has pockets, like metaphysical pockets that may or may not exist because he's a dog, and cartoon physics, but in any case, after realizing that Muriel is in no mood to actually eat, he decides to actually meditate, to actually think of a plan to actually try and rescue Muriel, and eventually realizes that if Dr. Zalost created the cannonballs that made Muriel depressed, then it stands to reason that he also has a cure for it. So he then proceeds to run up to Eustace and actually tell him his plan, and while Eustace initially doesn't want any part of it, it's eventually revealed that Courage's entire plan to actually infiltrate Dr. Zalost's tower is to have Eustace pose as a pizza delivery man and Courage as the pizza, and Rat goes to answer the door and brings the pizza inside. Well, the pizza inside, with Eustace being happy because he made a quick $20 and is happy that he actually wound up agreeing to Courage's plan in the process. But in any case, once Rat goes to go inform Dr. Zalost that his pizza's arrived, Courage decides to actually emerge from the pizza box and proceeds to run upstairs to the main cannonball making facility, which consists of a large cauldron made of an unknown liquid, as well, and is just a large crane that takes the cannonballs from the machine. And then proceeds to stack them in neat little piles. And Courage, upon seeing that there's a lot of massive piles stacked around the tower, you realize that Dr. Zalost could be a very big threat if his cannonballs are left alone and allowed to be fired off on other unsuspecting towns. So At which point he tries to actually try and go find Dr. Zalost, but then Rat actually comes down and intervenes. So Courage attempts to try and use the cannonballs to face off against Rat. And picks one up from one of the piles, but that only causes the pile to collapse and sends them going everywhere. Which Courage and Rat wind up slipping on, and eventually Rat winds up getting hit by one, which causes him to become a much larger and much more dangerous monster thing. And with his newfound size and strength, Rat and also anger, Rat then proceeds to charge directly at Courage and tries to actually attack him. But then Courage remembers something that what Muriel said about her happy plums being able to make anyone happy. So he pulls out a spoon and actually pulls out a spoon and mug and actually flings one at Rat, which placates it and causes it to turn into an infant. And with Rat now happy and no longer miserable and in pain, Courage realizes he's now safe to actually go and deal with Dr. Zalost. So he proceeds to climb up the rest of the tower, and up the rest of the stairs, which causes him to kind of tire out a little bit. But he then proceeds to get into the main living quarters where Dr. Zalost actually lives, and Dr. Zalost then ambushes Courage and flings him into the corner, having tied him up. And Dr. Zalost actually mocks Courage a little bit, pointing out that he's clearly thought it would be easy to actually infiltrate Dr. Zalost's facility without him noticing, and also points out that now that he has Courage in his sights, he also points out that he's going to play a little game with Courage. which is that he has rigged a cannon to fire a cannonball after a set interval, and tells Courage that if he can't finish a game of Hangman in that time, then Courage is basically going to get hit by a cannonball and become depressed. So it is a four-letter word. Courage actually can't figure out what the word initially is. He tries guessing several of the consonants, but he can't actually figure it out, and eventually he almost finishes the whole Hangman. So Dr. Zalost decides to let him buy a foul, quite literally. So Courage then proceeds to climb out of his bondage, which apparently isn't very secure if Courage can climb in and out of it. And then proceeds to give Dr. Zalost a 20. So they start going back and forth about trying to buy a vowel. Courage initially starts with an A, which Dr. Zalost says isn't in the word. So Courage tries to buy an O, which there winds up being two of. So Dr. Zalost actually winds up charging him $15, which Courage takes offense to, pointing out that seems a little bit ludicrous. But Dr. Zalost then proceeds to explain that it's one for the A, two for the two O's. So he winds up spending $15, and that's how the game actually plays. And then Dr. Zalost wonders if there's still a problem. But then he realizes that Courage wants his change. So and while wondering if Courage is actually going to need it, considering that they're currently playing a game of life or death where Dr. Zalost is about to shoot Courage with a cannonball, he eventually relents and decides to give Courage his $5 back. At which point Courage then proceeds to slip back into his bondage, and the two continue to play their game. And while Courage is actually thinking of what the word could actually be, he does eventually realize that without guessing any of the consonants, that the word is actually boom, because that's the sound a cannon makes when it goes off. And at which point Dr. Zalost finishes the puzzle, but then declares that Courage cheated and opens fire on him anyway. But Courage then proceeds to jump out of his bondage and dodge. At which point Courage leaps around the room, leaping from the scaffolding and the various bits of machinery that are hanging around, trying to avoid Dr. Zalost. And eventually he winds up in the upper chamber. But then Dr. Zalost actually corners him and starts choking Courage, and then points out that Courage could have just as easily used the stairs. And then is about to throw him into the cauldron where he makes his bombs. Where he makes his cannonballs. But Courage then once again remembers Muriel's words about how her happy plums can make anyone happy. So what he does is he actually takes the mug and actually throws it at Dr. Zalost's forehead, which obviously bonks off and kind of disorients Dr. Zalost for a little bit, but he decides it's of little consequence and lets Courage go. But Courage winds up clinging to one of the cranes that grabs the cannonballs, and the happy plums wind up falling into the cauldron, which causes the entire batch to not only turn pink, but also causes the cauldron itself to kind of go nuclear and explode a little bit, which causes the tower to actually start to collapse around them. And Dr. Zalost promptly decides to save his own skin and leave. And because Courage actually dropped the happy plums into the cauldron, it then causes a chain reaction that causes a bunch of happy cannonballs to actually fly out and cures every single citizen in Nowhere that was actually affected by Dr. Zalost's unhappy cannonballs, which effectively cures them, and the mayor and Floyd actually celebrate. But in any case, with the tower then collapsing, Courage actually saves one last happy cannonball and rat before the tower actually implodes, and runs back in the house to go and cure Muriel. But then Dr. Zalost actually shows up and also uses upon seeing the tower exploding, he runs into the closet to go hide. But in case Dr. Zalost then shows up and actually declares Courage a stupid dog and says that he's ruined everything. And Eustace from the closet then remarks that Dr. Zalost isn't wrong there, and that he calls him that all the time, pointing out that Courage can't ever do anything right. But in any case, Courage then uses the happy cannonball to cure Muriel, and then takes her into the kitchen to keep her safe. While Dr. Zalost actually deals with Eustace, who has since found his mallet, and tries to fight Dr. Zalost with it, but then gets hit by a cannonball, and apparently the cannonball uses his unlucky number, because he winds up getting hit by it and winds up actually turning into a stone statue and kind of crumbling a little bit, with Eustace just laying out one last stupid dog before he kind of crumbles a little bit. At which point, Dr. Zalost then proceeds to follow Muriel and Courage into the kitchen, frustrated with them defeating him and very much planning to finish them off. While Muriel actually hides under the table with Courage, and after reconciling a little bit, after being kind of celebrating a little bit that Muriel is actually back to normal, Courage then realizes Dr. Zalost actually came into the kitchen after them and covers Muriel's mouth to keep her from letting him know where they are. At which point, Dr. Zalost actually gets distracted by the happy plums that are still sitting out on the table, and decides to try one, which winds up curing his depression, and he becomes a good guy after this. At which point, Dr. Zalost finds them hiding out under the table, and while Courage and Muriel freak out a little bit, they eventually realize that Dr. Zalost isn't their enemy anymore. And Dr. Zalost actually asks them what it is that he ate, pointing out that he's never felt this happy before. And Muriel merely points out that it's her happy plums, and that their special recipe can actually make anyone feel happy. So Dr. Zalost actually thanks her for finally making him feel happy. At which point, Rat comes up and cuddles on him, and they finally give each other a proper hug. And with that, Dr. Zalost makes friends with Courage and Muriel, and presumably just leaves and goes off to kind of right his wrongs that he made now that he's happy finally. So yeah, this episode is interesting in that Dr. Zalost is very much one of the more threatening antagonists we've seen up until this point, because it's very rare for the entire town of Nowhere to actually be in danger. So the fact that he's one of the few to actually put the entire town in jeopardy makes him a very dangerous villain. He's one of the few to actually take out his anger on the whole town, not just the Bagges, and that makes him a very effective and very scary villain. And also the fact that he made weaponized depression because he himself was depressed is kind of funny. It's kind of like about how, but it is kind of about how some people do just kind of get depressed and kind of can't cope with that or deal with that. But it is very interesting that Dr. Zalost does eventually find a quote-unquote cure for his depression, and also his name is actually oppressed in a foreign. I think it's. I have the Wikipedia page open. I think. Yeah, he's a Croatian scientist, and his name Zalost actually means sad in Croatian. So he is indeed very much supposed to be a guy who is literally depressed, and that is his name. So, but he does wind up getting his depression cured by the end of the episode. So yeah, it is kind of an interesting episode, and it is a really effective two-parter, and I do like that. Despite working better as it's kind of a short 11-minute sketch show kind of thing, Courage the Cowardly Dog can do good two-parter episodes when it needs to. It's a shame that we don't actually get more of them because there's only like one other one. But it is interesting. It is interesting that we actually do that they can actually do good two-parters when they absolutely have to. But in any case, that's my review of Courage the Cowardly Dog. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on with the channel, then that's actually the best way to do that. Also, if you be sure to check out my Patreon, my Patreon description as well, because obviously this is a very big project that I've been carrying out for most of the month. So if you guys want to actually help support me by actually checking those out, by all means, just go check that out. Link is down in the description. I do very much appreciate it. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one, it may or may not be this one, whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me, and both may or may not be Courage related because we're in the middle of Courage Month. So, if you guys wanted to check either of those videos out, I would very much appreciate it. And also, be sure to check out my Twitch down in the description below as well, because we are actually streaming horror games to go along with Courage Month for the entire month of October. So, if you want to see those, again, link is down in the description, and also just follow me over there anyway, because I am trying to fulfill a milestone, and I need more people to do that, so be sure to go check that out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!